I think a materialist approach to things is very, very consistent with my experience in Christian social justice.
I feel like the deeper I get into anarchist practice, the deeper my faith is getting at the same time.
I would hope that, securing means of life for all would be something all people of faith would say, oh yes, that's at the basis of what we believe.
Those who are most marginalized know the most about the true, the good, and the beautiful.
To me, it's less that I think building class solidarity is a bad thing, as much as it seems like if you don't attend to things like anti-black racism, that's always going to get in the way of building class solidarity, actually.
And when you go back, you find that a lot of revolutionary grassroots participatory movements, the precursors to what you could call the barrio assemblies and these grassroots neighborhood organizations, a lot of these were sponsored by the church.
What does it mean to say that the Christian tradition is internally contradictory and there are antagonisms there and you're always being faithful to some aspects and betraying other aspects?
Welcome to the Magnificast, podcast about Christianity and leftist politics. I'm your co-host, Dean Detloff.
And I'm your other co-host, Matt Bernico.
Coming to you live once again from the end of the world. It's still happening. It's still coming. And we're back one more time to podcast as long as we have left until God raptures us up from these microphones, leaving only our podcasting equipment and our clothes behind. Let's see, Matt, we had suggested and never remembered a couple bits that we would start these apocalypse episodes with, and I'm just gonna re-invoke them now on the spot and see what you think. One was, we're continuing to build an apocalypse playlist, and I feel like there's a pretty obvious addition today based on the theme we'll talk about. I'll say that in a minute, but the one before that, the bit before that, is to say, what's the apocalyptic moment in your life this week, Matt?
Right, yes. We've sprung forward over here in the UK, so that's apocalyptic. I think I said it wasn't apocalyptic in previous episodes, but I'm here again saying that it is. The time has changed. I slept in later today than I normally do because of it, and that's great. A new beginning, and an old world is ending. Oh, a sleepy world. It's over. Truly an apocalypse of bedtimes. Yeah, Dean, what about you? What's apocalyptic in Canada?
That is a great question. There are so many apocalyptic things here in Canada, but so far I have to say we're forestalling the apocalypse. My voice is actually a little shot today because I did go to the big baseball game yesterday. The Toronto Blue Jays, we went to the stadium. They did a great job. Obviously they won, and so far they've played 2 games, and they play another one today and even more this week. Baseball, they are just constantly playing. And I feel like the apocalyptic moment will be the one game that they do finally lose this season, but so far we have deferred it. We're undefeated, and if all goes well today, it will remain so. But it could be an apocalyptic afternoon. Time will tell.
When it comes to sports, I have such a hard time in general, but especially with baseball. I'm just not interested in who wins, but I am interested in who's having the most fun out there. And do you think that the Toronto Blue Jays are having the most fun?
That's actually their whole brand, is they're the team that has the most fun out there, and that is what makes them so special. And it's the secret sauce that led them to the World Series last year, the power of friendship. Everyone's having a good time. And we're going to ride that wave all the way to the end. And I understand, I also have never been a sports guy in my life until 6 months ago. And all of a sudden, I can't wait to see these big bats hit those baseballs. And when you come, Matt, I'm not going to say that I'm going to make you go to a baseball game. I'm not even going to make you watch a baseball game. But you will encounter more baseball paraphernalia around my apartment than you ever have before. So just a word of warning to you.
Well, listen, if we go to a game and you do buy me the big Korean, the Korean corn dog, the Korean rice dog. Let me correct myself. I will probably go. I will go just for that.
Yeah. Okay. So it's actually so important that we talk about this on this specific episode. The thing about going to a baseball game is there's an official something of the Toronto Blue Jays for basically everything. Some of them you might expect. There's the official bank of the Toronto Blue Jays. There's the official airline of the Toronto Blue Jays. But the funny thing about going to the stadium is you do find out there are so many other official things. There's the official Korean rice dog of the Toronto Blue Jays, which obviously I ate. It is a giant Korean mozzarella stick, and it was worth it. There's an official pizza slice. There's just official everything. There's an official chicken sandwich of the Toronto Blue Jays. It does beg the question of what the unofficial versions of these things are, and I find that extremely troubling as an implied problem. But within the kind of microcosm of the Blue Jays experience, the dome itself, inside that tiny little world, you do get a chance to eat many official things, and it's pretty good. And also, it creates a kind of bizarre world unto itself. So I feel like it's a good opportunity to think about apocalypse. When you're inside the baseball stadium, you really get a sense of kind of the whole cosmos is contained in this one zone. And if they lose, that'll be bad news.
That makes sense. The 7th inning stretch, that's heralding the end times, and then the game is over, and then that's eschatology right there.
They read the official 7 seals of the Toronto Blue Jays at the 7th inning stretch.
Wow, 7 seals, 7 innings. That makes you think. A parallelism. Cool. Well, folks, we're back at it this week. We're reading Pablo Richard's Apocalypse, a people's commentary on the Book of Revelation. We're up to the 4th chapter. That's extremely exciting. Last week, we talked a lot about the churches that you hear about in this book. And this week, though, we're kind of taking a new turn. So we got through the churches. We got through what John of Patmos thinks of all these churches and thinks, is wrong with them, which is great. It's mostly imperialism, a running theme of this book. It's actually not mostly imperialism. It's all imperialism. That's the problem with all of these churches, and an interesting problem that's still with us. However, this week, what we're getting is something a little bit different. We're kind of turning away from the epistles to these churches, the letters to these churches, and we're going to get into the actual the beginning of the visions that John of Patmos is getting.
This is the weird stuff. It's what everybody comes to.
This is the weird stuff. Exactly. Yeah, I was super excited to get to the weird stuff because it's just okay, it's all about imperialism. The weird stuff can't be about imperialism too, can it? And the answer is it can. Dean, what's your take about the weird stuff? Having just read it, having coming hot off this book, what is your big take on the weird stuff?
Yeah, well, okay. Here are the big weird headlines coming your way in this episode. First of all, there are 4 weird, quote-unquote, living creatures in heaven, which I think is probably the best way to describe them. How else could you describe them? They're very weird. They're covered in eyes. It's the kind of thing that when you're 16, you're like, wow, that's crazy. That should be on a Christian metal band cover, album cover. And they're pretty good. I think Pablo Richard has a very funny interpretation of them that seems to me to be a minority interpretation, but guess what? It's a great one. So looking forward to talking about that. The other headline here is we do get to these 4 horsemen, which are probably the maybe the most recognizable symbol of the Book of Revelation. They're everywhere. They're in video games. They're in secular music. They're all kind of, I don't know, recognizable figures. And like you said, I think the kind of way of filtering these weird images through an anti-imperialist lens actually makes them even cooler and even more exciting. And it kind of drove home for me the stuff that Richard was talking about when he said what Revelation is really doing is kind of proliferating symbols. It's just creating a ton of ways to visualize through text what is happening in the world. And I think that I internalized that principle, I guess, or that hermeneutic idea the last couple weeks. But now that he's actually in it, I'm yeah, that seems pretty good and true. So that's where I'm at. I feel like so far it's a good demonstration of the thesis that he has, that the best way to read Revelation is to see it as a factory of symbols, and you've got to understand that as a kind of way to describe imperialism. So that's my initial hot take. I think it's working pretty well. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. I think this book makes a lot of sense if you are thinking about it in this sort of historicist lens, where the people who are going to be receiving all of these weird symbols are people who are, having firsthand experience on the fringes of empire and are suffering because of it. That makes this whole thing kind of snap into place for me and makes sense. I understand that there are other types of readings of Revelation, and I'm not here to say that they're wrong, but I am here to say they're not as good as this one, and they're probably. You know what? They're probably wrong. What I will say is that they probably aren't correct. I'm not a biblical scholar, and I would like to hedge my bets about saying who's wrong and who's not. But I think that reading it in this historicist way seems like the best bet to me. I think
if Pablo Richard is wrong, I don't want to be right.
Yeah, exactly. I think that if he is wrong, then this is the type of right I would like to be, or the type of wrong I'd like to be. Okay, well, let's kick things off. So we're talking about Revelations chapter 4:1 through 8:1. We're not going to read all of this because it's quite expansive. This is 4 chapters, and that would just take a lot of time. So we'll revert back to the actual scripture where it's important. Otherwise, we'll just try to recap it as best as we possibly can as 2 men on a podcast. But yeah, let's kick off here at the very beginning. So the very beginning of this chunk of text is chapter 4. It's in the New Revised Standard Version. It is titled the Heavenly Worship, and this part is another liturgical bit before we kick things off. John is looking around, and this is the beginning of the big heavenly vision that Jesus Christ is giving him, and the vision begins with a door to heaven standing open. And that is quite important, says Pablo Richard. It stands for opportunity, and it's a place where heaven can kind of get into history, where the divine can take place in history. The heavens are opened, and there's a possibility for the poor and the oppressed apart from empire. I'll read this bit from Pablo Richard here, and we can talk about it a bit. So Richard writes, "Here we have an open door. It's an opportunity and a beginning. The voice that calls to John is the voice of the risen Jesus, the very one who has earlier appeared to John and has sent 7 prophetic messages to the churches. Jesus is going to show John what must take place in the time to come. And this passage clearly refers to what is going to happen soon when the vision or initial liturgy is over. It may refer directly to the 7 seals. The 7 seals are the things that Jesus opens after the sort of liturgical part happens, or it could also refer to the whole section about the historical present before the final judgment. So the things that we're getting from this section of Revelation is not the final judgment. This is not the end of all things. This is not the end of history or whatever. This is an open door. This is God speaking into the world as it exists alongside history. Everything that's happening in when the seals are opened are happening concurrently with what's happening in the text. So this is not necessarily a prediction of what's to come, but this is a description of the social situation that the marginalized communities that are being written about in Revelation are experiencing.
That's right. And the open door thing I think is quite interesting because I guess the kind of point that Revelation is making here is that history is porous to heaven and vice versa, that, as Richard keeps talking about, heaven is in history in an important way. It's not like a sterile, immobilized time that's removed from human affairs or something like that, which I think is how popularly people understand heaven as, we're in time here in this imperfect place and we move through the direction of time. But when you get to eternity, you'll kind of be, I don't know, immobilized in some other kind of place. But there's an important interaction here, a kind of parallel track of time. And it reminded me of, there's a big trope in German Marxist critical theory, especially in people like Ernst Bloch and Walter Benjamin, but it shows up in other people too, Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse. But this sort of attention to the messianic, or to this idea that history is always kind of open to the incursion of some other time or order. And when I was reading the open door thing, it reminded me of that famous bit in Walter Benjamin's Theses on History, where he says, every second of time was the straight gate through which the Messiah might enter, kind of talking about the Jewish tradition of the future, sort of rupturing into everyday time. And for someone like Benjamin, that is, he's not a believing person per se. or a metaphysically believing person, let's say. But that sort of thing that could invade is like the promise of true revolution, in his case, an actual socialist revolution. And, there's like a sense that Richard is kind of arguing that the author of Revelation is basically doing something very similar in his own moment, which is to say, like, there's a different order to things where the martyrs and the people who've been killed by the Empire are doing okay. They're all alive up there. They're doing great. And God hears what they have to say. And it's that kind of order that, like, takes account of right and wrong that could, like, interrupt what's going on in the Roman Empire, through that kind of open door. So, I don't know. That is also one of those things we keep talking about where maybe I would have just, like, I don't know, glossed over that or read past it or not really thought too hard about it, but it is actually a pretty cool, radical moment of, like, hope for apocalyptic times, I think. Yeah, totally. And there's a trend in apocalyptic literature that will tell you that, like, when there's no revelation, when there's no apocalypse, the heavens are closed off. But this is an important moment where things are opening up, right? There's a connection, there's a possibility within history that maybe isn't there normally or something. Okay, so great. We have possibility in history. We have the inbreaking, the messianic moment. We have God in history struggling alongside humanity. Good stuff. We like that. But let's get to the weird stuff. So in this first bit, this heavenly worship bit, this like sort of liturgical part, we're getting this description of the heavenly throne room where God is up there on his big chair, and it's great. We love God on this chair. Is, I guess, it's so funny because, like, whenever you hear about this part, I think in church or something, it's always just about, like, wow, isn't God really cool and powerful up there? And let's ignore all of the other weird stuff around this because we don't know what it means. But this time you get to learn what these things mean. So the scripture tells us about God. It tells us about God and God's big chair. We love that. But around God's big chair, around God's throne, there are 24 other thrones, and seated on those thrones are 24 elders dressed in white robes with golden crowns on their head. Okay, so that's great. There's 24 other guys up there. I mean, guys in the gender neutral sense. They could be girls. They could be theys and thems as well. We don't know. But there are 24 people up there dressed in white robes with golden crowns on their head. And not only are there 24 folks up there, there are also 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. The first of these creatures is like a lion. The second is like an ox. The third has a face of a human. And what was the rest of it? We don't know. And the fourth one is like an eagle. And each of these living creatures has 6 wings, and the wings also have eyes on them, and they just kind of hover around day and night, singing to God about how great God is. Okay, this is the weird stuff that we do love in Revelation, and let me tell you about what these weird things mean right now. So, Pablo Richard tells us this. In the vision, there are the 24 elders and 4 living creatures. In general terms, these elders symbolize liberated humankind. Holy humankind that is not idolatrous and has made an option for life. More specifically, they represent the people of God, the people of the martyrs who receive the power to set up God's reign and who are priests for God. The number 24 represents the people in its perfection, the people of the 12 tribes of Israel, and the people of the 12 apostles. So that's 12 plus 12, 24. A little Bible math.
Yeah, a little Bible math for you. So there you go. These people that are up there around God's throne are the peoples who are following the 12 tribes of Israel and also the 12 apostles. 24. Put them up on the board. They're up there. And yeah, interesting. I don't know. Good to have someone spell that out for me, because I don't know. It never would have made sense to me in 1,000 years that that's what that meant. I would have never arrived at that idea myself. Okay. So then we also have these 4 living creatures. And Pablo Ricard says the 4 living creatures symbolize the cosmos. In Revelation, the number 4 suggests the 4 cardinal points, or the 4 ends of the earth. The author highlights the positive qualities of the cosmos, its power, its strength, wisdom, and majesty, and God's presence and wisdom in it. in Revelation, the moving force of history is not simply humankind, but also the cosmos. Liberated humankind and the cosmos alike participate in the liturgy of heaven and sing to the Creator God. So we got 24 people up there. We've got 4 weird living creatures, and they're all kind of participating in heaven together. And there you go. That's what it means. Or at least that's what it could mean. Who can say for sure? Like Dean said at the beginning, the interpretation of the living creatures is a little bit up for debate. Some people have said that the living creatures are allusions to the 4 Gospels, but that does not make any sense to me whatsoever, because the Gospels would have been written at the same time as Revelation, or perhaps some of them after. So all 4 would not have been in. They wouldn't have existed at once as like textual documents. I don't think. I could be wrong, but that doesn't quite make sense to me. There's a few others as well. Dean, do you have any others that you want to feed into this that are important to talk about?
Yeah, there are many interesting ones. So what you mentioned, that they're the Gospels, that's the like traditional kind of Western Christian interpretation. Apparently in Eastern Christianity, there's also a tradition of interpreting them as representing the elements, so fire, earth, air, and water, which is at least a bit closer to Richard in some respects. They liberated humankind, and also the cosmos in general. So, it's not like completely alien, I guess, to the history of Christian interpretation. There are some other things in the mix. I mean, this is all just from an extremely casual kind of looking at a few commentaries, but people try to like make sense of Revelation by comparing it to other parts of the Bible, especially prophetic literature, where you get some similar imagery, which makes a lot of sense. And maybe it gets you down the road, but Revelation is already always doing something kind of weird with it too. So the most immediate thing people go to is Ezekiel 10:14, where there's a vision of cherubim or angels that have 4 faces. One face is that of a cherub. The second face is of a human being. The third is the face of a lion. And the fourth is the face of an eagle. So just to review, in Revelation, you have a creature like a lion, a creature like an ox, a creature like a human, and a creature like an eagle. So pretty close here. I guess the substitution is that instead of having a face like a cherub, there's an ox instead. Some other commentators note that like that's true, but there are also some allusions to some other prophetic text here, usually related to angels. There's like 6 wings. These guys, these weird little guys, they have 6 wings. Also, there are heavenly beings in Isaiah 6 that also have 6 wings. So, lots of, clearly there's like a composite picture of like these weird heavenly things that are drawn out of other weird heavenly things in the Bible. That seems evident. But like, what do they signify or do? I guess that's kind of the hard thing. There's also some people who try to nail them down to say that they signify like angelic, like power in general, that all the angels are up there like worshiping God and so on. They're kind of representatives of different things, but I do think, just to shore up Richard's point a little bit more, there's a kind of tradition of some commentators who also see them as at least representing the created order that kind of honors God as a creator. So that's kind of interesting. And I guess the Richard angle, the liberation theology angle, is to say like, and what does that created order really want? It wants the liberation of creation. So, it's not a super neat and tidy thing, but I do think that Richard isn't also like, completely alienated from the history of interpretation. So a cool example of how liberation theology can actually like deepen intuitions people have had about the weird symbols of Revelation.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, there's a lot to say about the history of like interpreting these weird little creatures. They're probably big. Who knows? I imagine them being big, at least.
That's one thing it doesn't tell us. They could be 2 inches tall.
Wow. That's a great point. Something else. Sorry, this is just an aside really quickly. Richard, towards the end, and we'll talk about this again, I'm sure. he says that, some of the meanings and interpretations of these things can be polysemous, right? They can have multiple meanings. They can be referring to a lot of different things at once. And he says, that's fine. We should just keep track of the story that we're telling. So let's do that. Let's just keep track of this one story. Maybe there are a lot of other things to talk about as well, but I don't know. We'll get to them. Okay. So we have the 24 elders. We have these big or small creatures, and they're all standing around the throne. And John is there, I guess, seeing it all. Or Jesus is at least telling John about it. It's unclear to me exactly. But beside the throne, there is a scroll. And this scroll, it must be a pretty big one, because this scroll has 7 seals on it. And a little bit of dialogue erupts. Who amongst us is worthy to open this scroll? No one. No one is but Jesus. All of the creatures and the 24 elders agree.
24 out of 24 elders agree.
24 out of 24 elders agree. Jesus is the guy to open this scroll. To open these seals. And of these 7 seals, they're mostly horses. It's mostly horses behind these seals.
Yeah, that's right. It is mostly horses. I think it's kind of interesting to pause too on why Jesus is the one able to open the scroll. So they're like, nobody can open this, and then John starts to weep because he's like, oh no, what are we gonna do? Exactly why he thinks there's something really important in there, I don't really know, but anyway, he's upset. And Jesus is the person that is the only person who's able to do it. Richard interprets the seal or the scroll itself, the sealed book, as he puts it, as all of human history. And he says something here I think is really interesting. He says, the point is not that everything that's going to transpire is written there, but rather that it contains the mystery or secret of history, the revelation of God's mystery that makes history intelligible and gives it meaning. So the idea is God has all of history in his hand. And that's not like a discrete set of events. This is not like a kind of weird Calvinism or something where you're like, yeah, God, he's writing down when you're going to clip your toenails or something like that. It's this is the symbol of all of history. And only Jesus is capable of actually figuring out what that whole thing means. And as Richard goes on to say, Jesus can interpret history because he was slain. That is because he is the witness of his death. He is the faithful witness. He's the community's first martyr, murdered by the empire. And that is the qualification, Richard says, that makes him eligible to read this book, to break these seals. And I think that is actually really interesting because, I don't know, you can definitely, and people do definitely read that as a Christian supremacist sort of thing, right? Only through Jesus does history actually make any sense at all. Complicated stuff. But Richard goes on to say that what Jesus is doing is kind of building a community that is bound together by blood, by being the victims of imperialism. And he has pretty good evidence, I think, in his commentary that says the community set up by Jesus is a universal community that has the power to rule over the earth, but it's not a community of emperors, senators, nobles, and the powerful, but rather a community of priests, a holy community that listens to God's word, and a community that liberates the poor. And he goes on to say that, in fact, it's not just a Christian community either, that it's all victims of the empire at the time. So Jesus ends up being, the universality of Jesus is really the result of his particularity of being a victim of empire who kind of, calls together all the victims of empire. And that, I think, is also extremely cool. So if you want the key to interpreting history, it's that the victims of empire are the ones who kind of are the only people capable of delivering that understanding to you, which is such a big liberation theology thing, but also kind of unlocks a hermeneutic for reading the book of Revelation as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think that's so interesting too, because, you get the same vibe from that as you do from the Crucified People essay, right?
Right.
What is the historical purpose of Jesus dying in history? Is it to accomplish some kind of cosmological goal, or is it because that's what happens to people like Jesus?
Right. And
that's the kind of reading we get in this case. Jesus is just the first martyr. It's a little bit different than the big cosmological kind of play that I think Christians have eschatologically sometimes. Not to say that you can't have both at once or something, but it's different. It's different to kind of recognize the reason that Jesus dies is the same reason that, I don't know, like Joe Hill dies or something, right? Because he was a martyrological character in history where he's doing something that that empire doesn't like, organizing people to oppose it, right? So
it's also like he's not the first person ever killed by empire, but he is he's the divine organizer, like he's the guy who was like, I got killed by empire and I'm sick of that. I'm gonna call together all the other people who got killed by empire, every other martyr, and we're gonna build a different kind of society that is organized by those who are on the wrong side of empire. And I think that's what's really interesting, because it's also a really radical alternative to other revolutionary agendas in the ancient world. It's not like Jesus joins up with armed rebellion against the Roman state for lots of reasons we've talked about on the show in the past. But there's this sense of somebody has to kind of organize all these people who are being killed, because the killing of martyrs is also a means of division and separation, right? That's why you do it. You kill a movement leader like Jesus in the hope that it will scatter the movement, or you kind of isolate specific people and kill them so that the community becomes fragmented. I mean, this is just to draw modern parallels, this is the killing of Fred Hampton. It's the killing of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, or, all these kind of revolutionary leaders. It's the same kind of theory. And what makes Jesus unique is that it's the Christian community interprets him as the one who is cosmologically saying those deaths are not final. And in fact, in heaven, all those martyrs are getting together and they're building a revolutionary government. That's such a wild and awesome way of kind of interpreting Christian history.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it is exactly the feeling, what they couldn't kill went on to organize.
Right.
It's the Joe Hill song over and over again. It's that. Well, okay, cool. What a great theme. Who knew the Wobblies were such good Christians this whole time? Maybe we did, but whatever. Let's switch gears slightly, and we can come back to that particular theme if we need to in a little bit. But let's get into these seals. So just like you were saying, there's this big scroll in heaven, and John of Patmos, he's crying. He's up in heaven along with all these weird creatures. Who can open this big piece of paper? Which is such a funny idea to be that's the thing that you're worrying about amidst all these
monsters.
Yeah, exactly. Who can open this thing? And luckily Jesus is there. Don't worry. He's got the divine letter opener and he can do it. So he pops these seals, and the first 4 are horses. And the first 4, okay, we're going to talk about the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? This is the biggest and coolest thing that everyone loves to talk about in the Revelation cinematic universe. And I was not prepared exactly for how interesting this is going to be. So it is very interesting. Dean, is there a particular on-camera 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that you like?
Oh man, they're all pretty interesting. My favorite one that we will definitely probably spend a lot of time on is the Black Horse, an extremely hilarious apocalyptic symbol that has a lot of relevance for us today, but he's not the first one, so I feel like I'm happy to wait. What about you, Matt? What's your top, if you had to rank these 4 horses, what's your top horse?
The light green horse of death is the best one. Man, when I was reading this, though, I was thinking about... So, people who know me personally will know that a TV show that I really do enjoy is called Supernatural. It's a CW show. It's a Monster of the Week show. It's great for a lot of reasons. It's also completely unhinged when it comes to Bible stuff. And there's a lot of Bible stuff in this show. But there is a season in Supernatural, I think it's season 5, where they do get to meet the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, because they do have to stop they have to stop sort of the plot line of Revelation happening in their time. Sam and Dean Winchester. Yeah, and it is interesting though, because in the Supernatural universe, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse are sort of representing just big platonic ideals of bad things in the world. So there's the first one is war, the second one is famine, and then there's pestilence and death. right? These are like the big bad things that can happen to your society, and each one of these horsemen brings that particular thing. But what's interesting about that thing, I mean, that's a TV show where the people are just, they're just riffing off of whatever they want, and that's fine. But so like in the TV show sort of understanding of the four horsemen, each one of these four horsemen are bringing something that destroys society. But in Revelation, we get actually the inverse, that these four horsemen are society itself, and it's a society that's built on death. And that is amazing. Yeah. So, Dean, let me read this bit here, and then we'll get to it.
All right.
So the first four seals are the four horses with four riders, and they symbolically represent the death of the Roman Empire. Not necessarily like the end of the Roman Empire, but the type of death that the Roman Empire is bringing to the people who are on the margins. Okay, so the very first one is the white horse. The color white and the rider's crown are tokens of victory. The rider is a warrior carrying a bow, a typical weapon of barbarian people. The warrior rode forth victorious to further his victories. This is the first and most terrible thing about the empire. It's a victorious empire that continues to enjoy victory, such as the tragic reality for those oppressed by the empire. John, however, makes a critical observation. The empire is victorious like the barbarians. The rider is carrying a bow, and its victory is ultimately the victory of political violence, economic oppression, and death. And the political violence is the red horse, economic oppression is the black horse, and death is the pale green horse. So some people will falsely identify the rider of the white horse as being Jesus. This is something that Pablo Ricard warns us against. This is not correct. do not get it twisted. Just because there's like a parallel between a different place in Revelation where Jesus is riding a white horse does not mean this is also Jesus riding a white horse. This is a parallelism that Ricard says does not necessarily mean, just because there are two things happening in parallel doesn't mean that like they're synonymous, and they could be antithetical, they could be complete opposites, they could be, riffing off each other in different ways. So anyways, we have the white horse. This is the horse that's leading all the other ones, and it is the character of Rome that is victorious and conquering. So wild.
All these horses are pretty spooky, if you ask me. The idea here, though, that they do represent, just various ways in which the Empire is killing people or making life otherwise difficult, I think is pretty startling and interesting. They're also, they have this interesting relationship with the four living creatures we just mentioned. So the living creatures basically call them forward. And Richard, because he interprets the living creatures as the symbols of creation or symbols of the cosmos, maybe even more broadly construed, the idea is that the cosmos itself is bearing witness to the violence of empire. And I think that is really interesting and cool. So rather than the spiritualizing away of Revelation in Richard's commentary, you have this pretty profound participation of creation with God as sort of the and with the martyrs too, as witnessing the violence of empire. And as we'll see, maybe if we talk more about the pale green horse, there's also some really interesting kind of there's an interesting place for nature in that particular apocalyptic horse person as well. So lots of cool symbolism going on here.
Yeah, very cool. I guess something else that I thought that was quite interesting about the white horse is that so he's carrying the bow, which is, as Ricard tells us, a typical weapon of the barbarian people. He says possibly the Parthians. Sure. Shots fired at the Parthians. So sorry if there are any Parthians listening to this podcast. We're not trying to cast aspersions upon all Parthians, but but you are barbarians. No, just kidding. It is interesting though, because it's the pairing of the describing something like a big empire like Rome, right, as having a character of barbarism is really interesting as well, because it's because it stands so starkly opposite to the way that Rome would try to portray itself, or even the United States, right? the United States does a lot of PR trying to demonstrate that it is like, it's a city on a hill. It's like a champion of human rights. Mm-hmm. But just like Rome, it has this barbarian characteristic where it will, go wherever it pleases on its horse, and, like barbarians, like sort of like the most basest and like warlike people will take over, will take things, will plunder, will loot, and so on. And I think like that is it's just an interesting thing to kind of draw out, that the victory of the empire for the empire looks like, something great, looks like it looks like Rome or whatever, but the victory of the empire for the oppressed, it looks like barbarians raiding. It looks like somebody, coming to make your life awful. Just, I guess, an interesting depth to the white horse that I definitely would not have considered.
Yeah, it reminds me too, like, we're recording this on Palm Sunday. It reminds me also of the kind of juxtaposition between Jesus riding on the donkey versus the imperial horse. And I wonder, I mean, who knows if that matters here, but it's like an interesting interbiblical allusion where Jesus is kind of this like parody of empire on Palm Sunday, as opposed to the big military parade celebrating the victory of the Roman Empire. Jesus marches in on this donkey among the people themselves, and it's this great kind of bit of political theater. And I think you have something here too, right? Like all the horsemen, they kind of like echo that kind of Roman imperial victory, marching in on their big spooky horses. And the idea that Jesus is actually not one of those people, I think, is really important, because the white horse symbolizing that victory, like you said, it's like the U.S. propagandizing by saying, like, we liberated Iraq or something, or, we're going to liberate Iran by bombing its entire population. Like, that's the story of victory that it will tell, even though it's not a victory at all, or it's like, it's a victory of violence. So cool to kind of see that as the juxtaposition with Jesus as the opposite of that. Maybe moving to the red horse to talk a little bit more about each of these guys. The second horse is red. Its rider's mission is to take peace away from the earth so that people will slaughter each other. Richard says it symbolizes political violence. The Pax Romana, the peace of Rome, that's the violence for the poor and oppressed. And he also says the verb slaughter or slay denotes an extreme level of violence, and in Revelation it is applied to Jesus who is slain and to the martyrs who are slain. The empire slays and likewise sows violence among the oppressed. So there's this sense of just like an intensity of violence, and even a kind of irrationality of violence where people are, just killing each other. And Christians are the people who, rather than like join into that violence, become the victims of it on purpose. Like, that's kind of how I read Richard pulling it out here, is that you don't end up as a Christian, dropping out of empire in order to then kill a bunch of other people, which is arguably also kind of Jesus's critique of some of the armed rebellions of his own time, that they're basically suicide missions and not strategically achievable at that specific moment. And instead, the thing you can do as a Christian is refuse to participate in like the reinforcing kind of cyclical bloodbath of ancient Rome. And that too, I think, is a pretty powerful horse.
Truly. Yeah. It's really interesting the way that that's worked out. Okay. I'm holding myself back. I'm holding my own horses so that we can talk about the rest of these things. The next one is the black horse. So Richard writes that the rider holds a balance in his hand, a symbol of economic power. A voice is announcing an economic disaster. A ration of wheat costs a denarius, and 3 rations of barley cost a denarius. A denarius is a day's pay, and with it, formerly one could buy 8 or 10 times as much wheat or barley. A terrible inflation is raging. It affects what people can buy and leads to hunger among the poor. By contrast, the price of luxury goods, oil and wine, does not change. The black horse symbolizes the economic oppression of the Roman Empire. Only the wealthy enjoy the economic prosperity for which the empire is known, just as only they enjoy the Pax Romana. Man, Class analysis. It's in the Bible. We've got it right here. It's so wild. Like you could overly spiritualize or overly universalize this as being it's about pestilence. It's about something like that. But instead, it's actually about inflation and how poor people can't afford the things that they need, but rich people can. Tell your Sunday school teacher this and that they need to know.
That's right. I mean, this is the Donald Trump horse, right? Trump, he's bombing Iran for no reason at all. And now the cost of fuel and the knock-on costs of all other goods that require fuel to get to you are all going up, which if you're Donald Trump doesn't matter because you can just keep buying them. But if you're a person who is already stretched, your income has to stretch further and it can't at a certain point. That is exactly the kind of dynamic that's going on here. And I think the fact that it's also linked to this kind of cycle of violence and war and kind of inter-imperial violence, that's what's so fascinating, right? That there's this pattern of like inflation, this economic suffering that is directly tied to military imperialism. So it does feel like, to me, the black horse is the uniquely U.S. American horse. I kind of looked at some other commentaries on the horses, just like for the living creatures. This guy, Craig Koester, he's a professor at a Lutheran seminary. He wrote a commentary, a very big commentary, published by Yale University Press. And it goes through, in many granular ways, the multiple kind of readings of Revelation. Something that is interesting that he says about this is that he disagrees with the idea that oil and wine are luxury items in particular. He's like, rich people and poor people regularly consumed oil and wine, so it's not like, not like our own understanding today, maybe necessarily that these are like extra items. However, he actually deepens the Richard point in a different direction. I'll just read this bit because I think it's cool. The vision more probably reflects a common economic pattern. In the imperial world, a principal cause of food shortages was the earmarking of vast quantities of grain to feed the city of Rome and the armies, while throughout the empire, large areas continued to be diverted from the cultivation of cereals to the more profitable production of wine and olive oil. Some people made handsome profits in oil and wine, but reduced grain cultivation meant that when the harvest was meager or grain shipments were disrupted, many cities faced a food crisis. Some people exacerbated the problem by hoarding grain for their own use or to sell at inflated prices. In John's vision, the economic forces that create such shortages and led to hardship are allowed to have their way. So all that to say, like, the point that this is really a kind of biblical class analysis is maybe even more complex than Richard himself is willing to offer. And I think that is such a huge kind of piece here, right? That like the empire is just diverting all these resources into the war-making effort. It reminds me too, not only is the black horse a kind of U.S. American horse, I can't help but think of like the country I live in now, in Canada. The government is slashing a ton of government spending in a very typical neoliberal agenda, and they're explicitly putting it into the military budget, which is rising at an extremely rapid pace, and they're like constantly bragging about how great that is. That's happening across Europe as well, money being diverted away from things like humanitarian aid or development funds, or just everyday stuff, public services, spending on healthcare, education, etc., so that they can spend it on bullshit like bombs and planes and whatever garbage they want to kill people with. So I think it's like interesting to kind of say this is the military industrial complex, but even more than that. This is the biblical critique of kind of war profiteering, but even more broadly the kind of war economy that was already present in first century Rome.
Wow, that's really interesting. Okay. Again, we have to keep going. I cannot stop myself. The last horse is the pale green horse. Richard says, for the first time we learn the name of the rider, Thanatos, which means death. He's accompanied by Hades, the ruler of the dead. This rider has been given authority over a quarter of the earth to kill with a sword, famine, plague, and wild beasts. This horse and rider symbolize the overall reality of the empire and in a way sums up the three previous horses. The Roman Empire is an empire of death. It kills with political repression and economic oppression. Plague and wild beasts are symbols of death, and they are the lethal forces of nature unleashed as a result of the empire's repression and oppression. So this is the horse to kind of sum them all up. kind of underlining the fact that the Roman Empire is one that is about death at the end of the day. Not life, not liberation. This is about a particular type of death.
Yeah, this is also the COVID horse, right? That the more you industrialize animal production or whatever, the more you kind of also create these like weird genetic crossovers of bad viruses and so on. It's all here. It's all in the Book of Revelation.
Yeah, it is actually. The plague and wild beast bit was really striking to me. Very interesting to read that, I guess, this side of the COVID pandemic. Okay, so we have these seals about the horses, and that's great. Well, it's not great, I guess. It's maybe bad, in fact. Dean, sorry, we only have a little bit of time left. Where should we go next?
Okay. You've been doing a great job forcing us to talk through these horses at a rapid pace, and I've been talking too much, so I'm going to relieve you that duty. I'll push us through the last bit and let you talk about them. With a final note on the last horse, just to deliver on a point, that so these living creatures are also participating in calling these forward. The pale green horse, I guess, I think is cool to read as a kind of desire for the liberation of creation as well, right? That like, yeah, there's a metabolism between the earth and the economy and the metabolic rift. It's growing here in the Bible. So shout out to John Bellamy Foster. Okay, moving on here. So the horses, you get through them. After that, after all this stuff happens, John has told you about the lethal reality of the Empire. John turns back to looking at heaven. So he's looking at earth, now he's looking back at heaven. And in heaven, there are martyrs who cry out in a loud voice. And that cry kind of has some echoes, Richard says, through like the Exodus story about crying out before being delivered from Egypt. And the cry is specifically for justice and vengeance, which is pretty wild. They're like, when is God going to come avenge us, those of us who've been killed? And I think it's actually a very troubling and powerful thing to talk through. Richard interprets it to say that the answer given to the martyrs is first an acknowledgement of their works. They get a white robe. And then they're told that there are actually going to be even more martyrs, so you're going to have to wait. And Richard says, in other words, they're told that the justice and vengeance for which they plead will only be given at the end of time, that there's still more time to come before the end, and the present time of resistance and martyrdom still continues. As we say today, the struggle goes on, or it doesn't say this in Spanish, but I'm sure it's like La lucha sigue, a kind of popular Latin American lefty phrase. So there's this demand for justice and vengeance. They want God to intervene. They're told that they're going to have to wait, but God is going to intervene, and they're asked to be patient a bit longer. Matt, what do you think about this? These martyrs crying out for vengeance in heaven?
Yeah, it's so interesting. When I first read this bit, I immediately thought of my favorite life verse, James 5, where it's not necessarily the James 5, in case you don't know, is from the book of James, Jesus' brother. It's called the pericope is titled "Warning to Rich Oppressors," and it's all about rich people who don't pay their workers correctly. And in that verse, it says, "Look, the wages that you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you." And I thought a lot about that crying out, right? And in James 5, God hears them. God hears the voices of those people who are crying out. And in James 5, just like in Revelation, we're reminded that in oppressing other people, you've condemned yourself, right? You are like someone who's fattened themselves before the day of slaughter, right? So it's bad news for you in particular. And there's a similar message in Revelation where God is God hears the cries of people who are being oppressed, and even the other people in heaven, they hear the cries of the oppressed, and they're like, "God, will you please do something about this?" And God says, "You have to wait just like a little bit longer, but I'll get to it." It's such an interesting thing to hear, but it's also such a frustrating thing to hear. The other thing it made me think of, big time, was another person who's not a biblical scholar, a little guy. Again, he might not be little. Another person you might know as Karl Marx. He wrote a big critique of another philosopher called Hegel, and it's called The Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right. And within it, this is where you get Marx's big commentary about religion being the opiate of the people, and he says that it's an expression of real suffering and a protest against that suffering. He says that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, and the soul of the soulless conditions. And it's the opium of the people. And you get that kind of vibe from this bit of Revelation, where people are like literally crying out to God for God to change things, to intervene in history. And God says, you got to just hang on. And there is a real, sigh of the oppressed creature in that, where you have to just kind of hold on a little bit longer. And it's a tough one to sit with, but there's actually an interesting resolution to this tension a little bit later in Revelation that we'll talk about. But Dean, what do you think of this? This my corkboard of conspiracy theories that I've arranged here, where this is kind of like James 5, but it's also kind of like Marx's critique of Hegel.
It's a good corkboard. I'm looking at it. I'm loving it. The other thing that kind of, I guess, comes to mind for me is that the martyrs are not told to kind of put away their desire for vengeance. I think that is really interesting.
That's true. Yeah.
Right? Like, I think a lot of us in Christianity, especially in the West, kind of have this assumption that, like, you die and you go to heaven, and then all the, like, hatred that you have in yourself, or all the, desire for vengeance, that all goes away, and instead you kind of embrace, like, the universal message of forgiveness, and everybody did something a little bit bad, and we can all kind of, recognize that and go on in eternity. But there's a pretty strong desire for martyrs here to be like we held up our end of the bargain here, God. Like, we didn't fight back against these Romans, and then they murdered us, and like we were told that you were going to take care of that. So like, what gives? Like, they even say, like, how long do we have to wait for this? Like, they're complaining about it. And I think that is really interesting, and something that we don't talk about very often, that there's there's like a desire to see justice done, and not to just like sweep it under the rug, or to, make forgiveness the kind of thing that eliminates our ability to kind of talk through the violence of empire. So that came to mind for me as well. Just to also race us through the end here. So if, there's a frustration with the tarrying of God, that reaches a bit of a climax point where there is a cataclysm on Earth. There's a huge earthquake that happens in the text. And Richard says that you aren't supposed to interpret that literally, but as a kind of mythical or symbolic event. And he goes on to sort of talk through, like, all the frustration that God has. He's angry with the nations. They are doomed. They're in trouble. The mountains will run with their blood. This is very intense stuff that comes in kind of biblical language generally, and especially in prophetic literature. Richard says that these kind of cosmic catastrophes in the Bible, whether it's, a biblical prophet talking about the kind of natural world getting like turned upside down or inside out, or Revelation having this kind of big earthquake moment, these are kind of ways of talking about the radical change that has to happen for the oppressors to be removed from their position of oppression. He goes on to say, Richard does, that the wicked try to hide from this big earthquake, but guess what? They can't. And there are several social categories identified in verse 15. There are the kings of the earth, the nobles, the tribunes, the rich, the powerful. And then there's like this kind of et cetera of like all the slave and free people of the earth. The cataclysm shakes the Roman Empire. Richard says that it threatens everybody, in particular because the poor and oppressed, Richard says, are usually the first people to suffer from a disaster like that. So, it's kind of like how even something like COVID, right? It's a disaster that comes for everybody. It's a natural consequence of our own global imperial ambitions. And yet it's the poor who suffer the most from that kind of cataclysm. But in the middle of all that, Revelation tells us that God will protect the holy ones, and they have to kind of form an alternative community. And that alternative community is also bound together by a kind of seal. So the beast has a seal. That seal prevents Christians from buying and selling. God also has a seal, and that's what identifies people as being together and not being annihilated or exterminated by this big problem. That goes on to kind of result in this big important number, 144,000 people who are marked to be saved. Lots of very funny evangelical commentary about this, that's a pretty small group of people, maybe is already full. For Richard, the figure is actually another symbol that signifies perfection. So he says the people of God is complete, perfect, and well organized. This is the people of the holy ones who were on earth, made up of people or the community that is an alternative to empire. It's the people who keep the word of God and the testimony of Jesus. So just to review here, there's a huge cataclysm. It affects everybody, but God preserves the people of God who are being organized together to form an alternative community that can actually survive a cataclysm like that. The seventh seal is incoming, and we are running out of time, but we can go over a minute or two. Matt, what do you think about this cataclysmic event?
Yep, really interesting. The thing that really stuck with me about this one was just that, the poor are the first people that are always hurt by sort of cataclysmic events, but and how that's like attended to in the text is really interesting. Yeah, I like that a lot. And the one other thing about the 144,000 is Richard says that's 12,000 for each tribe of Israel. Right. Again, kind of like recognizing the like Jewish context of this book is good, especially to kind of like help contextualize the anti-Semitism that we talked about last week. Mm-hmm. But anyways, great stuff. Great stuff. So we have great stuff. We love this. We love cataclysmic events. The first 4 seals are the horses. Each horse worse than the last one. They're all bad horses. I mean, I'm sorry, the horses aren't bad themselves. No horse could ever be bad. Like dogs, they all go to heaven, I'm sure. But you know what I mean. And then we have the martyrs crying out. That's the 5th seal. And then we have the cataclysm. That's the 6th seal. And now it's time for the 7th seal, the one that we've all been waiting for. Okay, the 7th seal is a really short one, Revelation 8:1. This is one that actually has a lot of interesting historical and like sort of artistic allusions to it, especially within the 20th century that we can talk about maybe for a minute. But this is the 7th seal is that Jesus opens it, and then there's silence in heaven for about half an hour. And this is quite an important one for a few reasons. It's lineated in a very like opposite sort of way than we've been hearing about heaven this entire time. Like throughout the entire bit that we've been reading, people in heaven are talking to God. They're shouting out. There's all these weird creatures. There are people that are on earth crying out to heaven and God hearing them in heaven. And now we have heaven and it's quiet. So this is what Richard says. When the Lamb broke open the 7th seal, there was silence in heaven for about half an hour. This mysterious verse, which closes the apocalyptic vision of history, begun in Revelation 4:1, is quite polysemic. In other words, it has many meanings. I think we must respect that polysemia as long as consistency with the whole section is maintained. In a way, the silence in heaven concludes what begins at the opening liturgy in chapters 4 and 5, where heaven is full of songs, hymns, and shouts. In the 2 visions of heaven, we also feel the cries of the martyrs, and now there's silence in heaven. Silence in heaven now impels us to look for God on earth. Indeed, the next section of the 7 trumpets will be a frightful yet hope-inspiring apocalyptic struggle on earth. Silence in heaven focuses our attention on earth. Okay, this part is so interesting to me because the 7th seal is always like the really scary part, right? This is like, this is when God is quiet. And that is the thing that should be, I think, scary to people. Sometimes you hear about the 7th seal, the silence in heaven, when people are getting waxing really philosophical or theological, I guess, about like the awful crimes of humanity in the 20th and 21st centuries, like, talking of the Holocaust or something, or of nuclear war. That's when God is silent in heaven, where like we want God to intervene, but when we look to God to do it, there's just silence. The difference here, the resolution here, that I think is quite interesting and important, especially given the side of the oppressed creature stuff we said earlier, is that instead of this being about the silence in heaven or God's quietude, the way that God isn't intervening, this is instead a moment where we should be refocusing. We should look for God somewhere else, which is quite different than the way that people usually kind of interpret the 7th seal sort of moment of silence.
Yeah, it is also there's such an interesting narrative moment here, right? Like you've just gone through all these other seals. There are 4 seals that are basically just like here's absolute intensity about the violence on the earth. These horses are running around and everything is going very badly. You have a seal where the martyrs are crying out and like really, demanding justice from God. And then you have the seal we just read, which is, a brutal, insane shaking of the entire earth. And so then to have the seventh seal break, it creates this, like, on the one hand, I guess you could read it as like a break, like a bit of a reading break from all the intensity in the Bible. But it's actually, I think it's like the opposite of that. It's like it creates suspense. You're like, oh man, if the last one was an earthquake, what is going to happen here? And then it's completely quiet. Like that is such a like kind of terrifying moment in some respects. It creates some suspense. And other commentators, as you might guess, don't go Richard's way of saying that's the turn to the earth, because in a moment or two, in the rest of chapter 8, there's a lot more stuff that happens in heaven. There's going to be a bunch of trumpets that are blasted, and lots of, the narrative is like still kind of keeping us up, I guess, in the heavenly zone. But I really like the way that Richard is like, the silence kind of gives us a chance to reflect on all the stuff that has just happened on Earth that we were told about. The violence of the economy, the violence of the military, the kind of bloodlust of the empire, the natural disasters that we're living through. I think that is actually a really powerful way of kind of reading. Maybe whether or not it's what the text intends, it is like what the text can do. It like gives you a chance to take a beat and like look back at the material consequences of all this stuff. So a great postmodern polysemic moment, as Pablo Richard puts it, where you can just finally, absorb the material consequences of all this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It's really cool. I think it's I don't know whether or not it's correct. It is a reading that I do like, so I'll embrace the polysemia and let it mean a lot of things at once.
It's a good semia.
Cool. It's the right amount of semia, I would say. What are your overall takes about this particular chapter?
Okay. My overall take is this is probably the most systematic understanding of the violence of the imperial economy that I think appears basically anywhere in the Bible. And I think I never really grasped that until going through Richard's commentary in particular. It's like, it's one thing to read, Jesus, he's telling parables and stories about how like landowners, are speculating on your land and they'll take it from you if you're not careful. Or, you get kind of like the Old Testament stuff around how there's a relationship between like the activity of the rich and the kind of deprivation of the poor, that these are two sides of the same coin. Like, there are kind of these intuitions, moral intuitions, and even some structural critique throughout the whole Bible of kind of the economy or political economy. But I feel like these four horsemen in particular really express like the details of how that structural oppression cashes itself out, even down to the point of like inflation on goods. And I think that is such a fascinating and kind of underrated piece of Revelation. So that really stuck out to me. This is a production of symbols, but the symbols do kind of pull you into a better understanding of the reality of what's happening. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. This is like the maximum amount of like real systematic class analysis and imperialism in the Bible. And it's kind of more than I would have ever have expected or hoped for. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing at, as a historical explanation of the world or whatever, right? The Roman Empire. But it's also amazing that there's so much in here for us to think through right now. I mean, like, there's always a way that, like, the Bible's always kind of speaking a truth to power or something, or speaking kind of, there's a prophetic and critical word in the Bible always, but it's just like, dang, it really hit me over the head, I think, with this one. Especially the black horse, especially the green horse. We're talking about COVID. We're talking about, all of this kind of stuff. And just, this is written for a community of people living in sort of a pre-capitalist time. But there's still, there's still so much to be gleaned from it. Just like the Bible is always kind of telling us something about the messianic figure and the ways that Jesus is crucified for, a really particular reason historically, we also have these like marginalized communities that are still very much with us. They're still very much part of the conversation. And it does make you rethink, I don't know, exactly what it is the Bible is telling you.
I agree. Well, okay. At the end here, I said that we were going to add a song to our big apocalyptic playlist. And I think the one this time around for me was Johnny Cash's The Man Comes Around. I'm sure you've heard it before. A great apocalyptic vision. There's some spooky stuff in there. A big kind of judgment song. I'll put it on the big playlist. Matt, any other, maybe just, I guess to close this off, like what's the value or utility of these kind of like imaginative symbols or scenes? Maybe that's a good way to just close this episode. Like there's a lot of wild stuff in here. Living creatures, horses, earthquakes. How does that maybe like pull us into rather than out of an understanding of what's going on? Yeah,
it's tough. I was thinking about that a lot because, the people who are hearing this initially, they don't have the immortal science of Marxism. They don't have a bunch of sociology to draw on to talk about poverty, to talk about imperialism. So they have this like sort of religious language to talk about it, and I think that's really helpful. It is a cinematic universe for people to make sense of the world, in the same way that we do in other ways. I would say, maybe unhelpfully, that the Book of Revelation has all of this like symbolism that is, I think, unhelpful for us. They're definitely blockers for us to like really think about what these themes. But once you do kind of get a peek behind the curtain or what's going on, it does make you, rethink the ways that we deploy these types of like visual elements or mythological elements within our own society, the way that we think about, the four horsemen of the apocalypse and so on. So I guess that's quite interesting. But man, there's so much homework to do on this one, and Christians are just not getting it anywhere, I don't think.
That's right. Well, there you have it. We'll keep digging into all the weird and interesting stuff next time around. There's more to come. There are angels and trumpets and bugs with people faces and all kinds of other weird stuff that right now I couldn't tell you even one thing about, but soon we'll tell you too many things about them, and as we have done in this extra long episode. That's it. If you like what you heard, you can support us on Patreon at patreon.com/the Magnificast. If you do it, you can get into our Discord community, a great place to chat with other folks about all kinds of stuff, including this, and including recently how to organize your local church justice and peace group, and many, many other things. Some good recipes, great photos. Get in there. It's a good group of folks. Our music is by Mario Armstrong, and our outro is by The Illogical Spoon, and we'll see you next week.
I don't wanna get up for church in the morning, souls alive. Heaven come to earth and there won't be no church. We'll meet down by the riverside. There we'll swim with all creation. Never get tired, never bored. Don't worry, someday there'll be no dam between us and our Lord.